The moment the stage lights dimmed to a single haunting spotlight, a hush fell over the Dolby Theatre. That was different from the usual pre-performance anticipation. This wasn't the restless, popcorn-munching quiet of a crowd waiting to be entertained. This was the breath-held silence that comes when something in the air feels electrically significant. 10-year-old Elijah Mitchell stood center stage, barely tall enough for the microphone stand, his small hands trembling as they gripped the metal pole. He wore a simple navy blazer that looked borrowed from his father, slightly too wide in the shoulders, and his untied shoelaces peeked out beneath his dress pants, a detail that made him look heartbreakingly young. When the first piano notes of All by Myself began to echo through the cavernous space, you could practically hear the collective, mental calculation of the audience, a child singing. One of the most emotionally devastating power ballads of all time. This could either be a train wreck of epic proportions or something that would break the internet by morning, but Elijah didn't see the 3,000 skeptical faces staring back at him. He closed his eyes, and in that instant, he was back in his grandmother's cramped apartment in Boise, Idaho, where he'd lived for the past 2 years since his mother's passing. He could smell her famous chicken soup, hear her rickety old piano with the sticky middle C key, feel the way she'd cup his face in her weathered hands, and say, "Elijah, baby, your voice is going to carry you places." She'd passed away 6 months ago, just weeks before his audition tape for AGT had been accepted, leaving him completely devastatingly alone. The producers had found his story almost too heartbreaking to believe. Orphaned at 8, raised by his grandmother, who died just as his dreams were taking flight, and they'd worried the narrative might seem manipulative. But watching this tiny boy on the massive stage, his vulnerability wasn't a story. It was a raw living truth that radiated from his pores. The judges exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Sofia Vergara leaned over to Heidi Klum, whispering something behind her hand, while Howie Mandel gave a small, encouraging thumbs up that Elijah couldn't see. Simon Cowell, however, remained stone-faced, his arms crossed, his signature skeptical scowl already forming. He'd seen too many precocious kids with pushy parents, too many viral moments manufactured for sympathy. He tapped his pen against the judging table, his expression screaming that he was already mentally drafting his no speech. The first verse began, and Elijah's voice, sweet, pure but breathy with nerves, wafted through the speakers. It was nice, pleasant, the kind of voice you'd expect from a talented child. In a school musical, Simon's pen stopped tapping. He tilted his head slightly as if listening for something specific, some indication of what this kid was really made of. Then came the pre-chorus and everything changed. Elijah's voice began to strengthen, his diaphragm support kicking in with a technique far beyond his years. The notes grew richer, more resonant, filling the theater, in a way that made audience members straighten in their seats. When he hit the line and no one's there to dry the tears you're crying, his voice cracked, not from technical failure, but from a well of emotion so deep it physically hurt to hear. A woman in the 5th row gasped audibly. The camera caught her wiping her eyes. And suddenly the entire crowd seemed to lean forward in unison, drawn by this gravitational pull of pure, unfiltered grief set to music. The stage lighting shifted from cool blue to warm amber, bathing Elijah in a glow that made him look almost ethereal, like a tiny angel singing his heart out to heaven. The chorus arrived like a tidal wave, all by Missy Elf. Elijah's voice exploded with a power that seemed impossible, from such a small frame hitting the high notes, with a clarity and control that would make vocal coaches weep. The band swelled behind him, but he was leading them, not following. Every dynamic shift, every emotional nuance was coming from this child who'd lived more loss in 10 years than most adults experience in a lifetime. The audience was on its feet now. Not in the polite standing ovation way, but in the involuntary cathartic way. People stand when witnessing something that transcends entertainment. A father in the balcony pulled his own son, close tears streaming down both their faces. A group of teenage girls held each other sobbing. Even the stern-faced security guards along the aisles were dabbing at their eyes, but the most profound transformation was happening at the judges' table. Heidi Klum had her hand over her mouth, her mascara already running. Sofia Vergara was openly weeping, reaching for tissues as she shook her head in disbelief. Howie Mandel had gone completely still, his comedy producer brain momentarily shutting down. As his humanity took over and Simon Cowell Simon who perfected the art of emotional armor. After decades in this business, was visibly shaking. His skull had melted away completely, replaced by an expression so vulnerable it looked alien on his face. His eyes were glassy, his jaw clenched tight in that specific way men do when they're desperately trying not to cry. He uncrossed his arms and leaned forward, elbows on the table, his entire body language screaming that he was all in. Elijah was lost in the music now. His small frame swaying with the emotion of the bridge, he hit the final. "I want you back" notes with a desperation that felt like a prayer, his voice soaring to the rafters where it seemed to hang in the air. Suspended in time, the last piano chord faded, and for a heartbeat, there was absolute silence. Not the silence of shock, but the sacred silence that follows a truly spiritual experience. Then the theater erupted. The applause wasn't just loud, it was volcanic, a physical force that seemed to shake the foundation of the building. The audience was screaming, many still on their feet, some literally jumping up and down, as if their bodies couldn't contain the energy. But Elijah just stood there, eyes finally opening, looking utterly confused by the response. He'd been singing to his mother and grandmother, not to these thousands of strangers. Their reaction seemed to surprise him more than his own performance. Heidi Klum was the first to speak, but her voice broke immediately. She tried twice to form words before finally managing. "Elijah, sweetheart, oh my God." She pressed her hand to her chest. "Your voice, but more than that. Your heart, you just took all of us on your journey." "I have goosebumps everywhere." She held up her arm to prove it. Sofia Vergara could only nod through her tears. Finally choking out in her accent, "Mijo, you are an old soul." That was not a performance. That was truth, that was pain and beauty and hope all at once. She blew him a kiss that he caught shyly against his chest. Howie Mandel stood up, walked around the judges' table, and approached the stage, something he almost never does. He knelt at the edge, looking up at Elijah with reverence. "Kid, I've been in entertainment for 40 years. I've seen everything, and I can tell you what you just did. That's not talent, that's a gift. A genuine God-given gift, and the fact that you shared it with us, after everything you've been through." He had to stop, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, just thank you," but everyone was waiting for Simon. The theater grew quiet again as Simon slowly stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked deliberately around the table. His footsteps echoing, he stopped directly in front of the stage, looking up at Elijah with those sharp, discerning eyes that had launched careers and crushed dreams. For a long moment, he just stared. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Elijah, do you know what you just did?" The boy shook his head nervously. Simon's voice grew stronger, more urgent. "You didn't just sing a song, you healed people. Every single person in this room was carrying something. Some pain, some loss, some loneliness, and you, with your courage and your voice and your truth, you gave them permission to feel it, to release it, to maybe start healing it." He paused and a single tear escaped, tracking down his cheek. "My job is to judge, but right now I don't want to judge you. I want to thank you." The crowd started chanting, golden buzzer," but Simon seemed not to hear them. He kept his eyes locked on Elijah. "I lost my mother when I was a teenager." Simon said, a revelation he'd never shared publicly before. "And I spent years trying to bury that pain under success and noise. But watching you, you made me remember that the best thing we can do with our pain is turn it into something beautiful that helps other people." He looked down at the golden buzzer button on the judges' table. Then back at Elijah, "You remind me why we created this show. Not for the tricks or the gimmicks, but for moments like this. For voices like yours." The audience was screaming now. A desperate, pleading roar. Simon walked back to his chair, but instead of sitting, he placed both hands on the table. Taking a deep breath, Heidi, Sofia, and Howie were all on their feet beside him. Simon looked at his fellow judges, then at the audience, his face a mask of pure determination. He reached out his hand, hovering over the golden buzzer. "Elijah Mitchell," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos, "you are not all by yourself anymore." His palm slammed down. What happened next was pure cinematic magic. The golden buzzer detonated like a supernova, sending a torrent of golden confetti and glitter, cascading from the ceiling in a waterfall of light. The audience's roar became deafening, primal, as if the entire theater had become one living, breathing organism celebrating this child. The judges rushed the stage, Heidi and Sofia getting there first, enveloping Elijah in a fierce hug that lifted him slightly off his feet. how he ruffled his hair, still shaking his head in wonder. Simon stood back for a moment, watching the scene with his hands in his pockets, that rare, genuine smile spreading across his face. Then he, too, approached the stage, and when Elijah looked up at him with those big, overwhelmed eyes, Simon simply extended his hand. They shook hands like men, like equals, like two people who understood each other's pain, without needing to speak another word. Backstage host Terry Crews was openly bawling, his massive frame shaking with sobs as he watched the monitors. "This is what it's all about," he kept saying to no one in particular. "This is why we're here." The producers watching from the control room knew they had just witnessed television history. The social media team was already reporting that clips of Elijah's audition were being shared at a rate they'd never seen. Comments flooding in from around the world in dozens of languages, all saying variations of "I'm crying," "I'm speechless, this changed me." Elijah's social worker, who'd accompanied him to the taping since he had no legal guardian, stood in the wings clutching a tissue, her heart both breaking and soaring. She'd fought to get him this opportunity, arguing that music was the only therapy that had reached him after his grandmother's death. Now watching this boy who'd barely spoken for months pour his entire soul into a song, she knew she'd been right. The other contestants backstage, seasoned performers, acrobats, magicians, dancers, all stood in silent respect, many of them crying too. There's an unspoken code among artists. When you witness true greatness, you don't compete with it. You honor it. The aftermath unfolded like a dream. Simon Cowell, usually the first to retreat to his dressing room, stayed on set for over an hour, talking with Elijah, asking about his future plans, promising him the best vocal coaches in the world. He made a point of telling the cameras, "This isn't about the show anymore. This is about making sure this young man has the support system he deserves." The other judges took turns, sitting with Elijah on the edge of the stage, their high heels and designer shoes dangling next to his scuffed sneakers. They talked about his mother, his grandmother, the songs they used to sing together. He told them his grandmother always said his voice was a light in the darkness, and that he'd promised her he'd try to shine it for other people who felt lost. The performance clip, when it aired 3 months later, broke every AGT record. It hit 10 million views in 6 hours. 50 million in 24 comments poured in from celebrities, world leaders, legendary musicians. Celine Dion herself posted a video response, her voice thick with emotion. "Elijah, you didn't just sing my song, you made it your own. And you made me remember why I sang it in the first place. You are a gift." Elton John offered to write with him. Oprah reached out for an interview. But through it all, Elijah remained that same shy, sweet kid from Boise, the one who sang to his dead mother and grandmother, because they were the only audience that mattered in the months that followed. America's Got Talent became Elijah's family. The producers assigned him a mentor. The other contestants became his siblings. Protective and proud Terry Crews checked in on him weekly. And Simon Cowell, the man known for his cruelty, became a surprising father figure, calling Elijah personally before each performance to give him pep talks, arranging for him to record his first single, a song Simon himself helped write about loss and healing. When Elijah finally won the entire competition, his acceptance speech was just 7 words. "Mom, Grandma, I wasn't alone after all." What did you feel when Simon hit that golden buzzer? Did you expect that voice to come from such a young performer? Comment below and let me know where you were watching from, when this moment made you believe in magic again. The legacy of that night continues to ripple through the AGT halls. Producers now show Elijah's audition to every nervous contestant, backstage saying this is what courage looks like. Vocal coaches use his performance to demonstrate that technique. Without soul is just noise. And Simon Cowell, when asked in interviews about his most memorable golden buzzer moment, always gets that same glassy look in his eyes before he answers simply, "The boy who taught me that strength comes in the smallest packages, and that the most powerful voice in the world belongs to a child who once thought he was all by himself." If you were moved by how this young man turned his pain into something that healed thousands, then click the video showing on your screen to watch another unforgettable AGT performance, where a single moment redefined what talent truly means. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when a different kind of underdog takes the stage and leaves the judges speechless in a completely unexpected way.